My name is Abdi Soeherman. I'm originally from Indonesia. I was born in a city called Palembang in South Sumatra. And Sumatra is one of the 5 biggest islands in Indonesia. We have about 17,000 over islands in Indonesia. I have a big family. It's a family of 8. My father and my 5 other siblings. But right now, only 5 siblings survive. My father, my mother have died, and my sister, my eldest sister, also passed away in 2008. My school of thought initially was just like a majority of Indonesian Muslims, which is Sunni Shafi'i. Majority of Indonesian are Muslims. About 87 to 90% are Muslims, and one of this school of thought, which is Shafi'i, is adhered by majority of Indonesian Muslims. I would say my upbringing was religious and could be traditional as well, because my father was actually came from you can say Islamic tradition background. As you may know, there are 2 big Islamic organizations in Indonesia. One is Nahdlatul Ulama and NU, and the other one is Muhammadiyah. NU is actually more traditional than Muhammadiyah, which claims to be more modernist. So initially my father was influenced by NU, which is more traditional. So every time, and he would like to make sure that all the children, all my siblings, were able to recite the Quran and know how to practice the wajibat. We used to go to the mosque mostly for the males, for me and my brothers. We used to go to the mosque every Friday, any important occasions, but most of the upbringing was actually done at home, because my father was our primary tutor for Islamic teaching. As I mentioned, he would like to make sure that all my siblings and myself would be able to recite the Quran and do the wajibat carefully and regularly. Quite active when I was youth, until I was in high school. I was just like a normal youth, you know. But then when I was in high school, I was asked by my friend to join an activity, Islamic activities in a mosque. It's a campus mosque called Salman. So Salman actually belonged to this university, ITB, Bandung Institute of Technology. So there's a big mosque there where the youth used to be active, and until now they're active there too. So I was asked to join in a magazine called Charisma. That's a Islamic youth magazine. And initially I had no experience on the magazine, but then finally I learned from that. And other than that, there's also another Islamic group discussing various topics of Islam. And I was asked to be one of the tutor. So before that, they trained me. Of course, the more senior people trained me how to deal with the youth and explain in a better way about Islam and about how to practice Islam more regularly, etc. At that time, I didn't meet any people from different school of thought, because majority of Indonesian, they don't really know about the differences in Islam. They thought Islam is only one, which is later on I know as a Sunni Muslim. But only after I joined the activities in the mosque, and right after the Islamic Revolution of Iran, then we became to know that there is another school of thought other than the Sunni Muslims. So until that time, I didn't know of any other school of thought other than Sunni Shafi'i. I think one of the biggest influence to my conversion was Islamic Revolution of Iran. At that time, there were lots of people, especially youth, who admired Imam Khomeini, especially because people thought that he could bring about the revolution, and people were waiting for a true Islamic leader, and they found that Imam Khomeini was one of those leaders. And it's not only just a leader, but also Islamic leaders. But most people at that time, they didn't know about he was being Shia, or because as I told you before, that most people they didn't really understand even now about the difference between Sunni and Shia. So they just admire Imam Khomeini. They didn't wanted to know about him more. But in the other hand, the media was not always good about him, and the media bombarded the people with negative news and misconception as well. Like they didn't really want to see that non-Shia youth or Muslims would follow him finally. So because of that, they just introduced some misconception. For instance, they said this Imam Khomeini, although he's a great leader, but he's not a Sunni Muslim. He's from another school of thought. They didn't mention about another school of thought. They are Shia. He's a Shia. He's a Shia leader. So, and Shia was heretic. Is deviant. So we have to be careful with Khomeini. Don't go too much with him. You can put his poster at your study room, but don't follow him too much. So, but then I met a personality, a figure by the name of Jalaluddin Rahmat. We call him Kang Jalal. Kang Jalal means in Urdu or Gujarati, I think in Urdu, Jalal Bhai. Bhai means brother. Kang means brother. So he's actually one of the Islamic scholar, not necessarily graduated from Islamic University or Hausa, but his background was actually in psychology of communication, and he is a very articulate person, and he used to give different lectures, series of lecture, whether it's related to his own background or about Islam. So most Islamic youth knew him from his background as an Islamic lecturer. So he's the one. So one day, once we had Islamic course. It's like a series of course in 2 weeks, and different lecturers were invited to give their lectures, and one of them, Mr. Jalal, Kang Jalal, was actually not one of the lecturers. So, but one of the lecturer, he was not able to come. So Mr. Jalal was finally replaced him. So then he discussed about God and about the Tawheed in different way from the lecturer whom he replaced. So it became more interesting. So then after that, there's a Q&A sessions. Then people not only ask about Tawheed lecture about God, but they also ask about many things. And some people knew that Kang Jalal was studying about Islamic Revolution of Iran. So people started to ask about what happened with this revolution, who is Imam Khomeini, what is the influence to Indonesian Muslims. So, and they ask also whether this Imam Khomeini is really a great leader or he's just like another dictator, because from media people knew that he executed those people who supported Shah Reza Pahlavi. So then he tried to explain, clarify all those misconceptions. And people also ask, what is the difference between Shia and Sunni? Why the media just portrayed him as a Shia leader, not as a Muslim leader or Islamic leader? So is that so much different between Sunni and Shia that he cannot be considered as Islamic leader? So then, he tried to clarify all those things. So that those clarification of misconception made some people aware that everything from media not necessarily true. So we have to dig up more after this. So that's the first encounter with Shiism, that I have gone through. Among the Ahlul Bayts, the personality who really touched me or sparked me and made me aware about the importance of Ahlul Bayt was Lady Fatima. I was thinking a lot before this encounter with the Islamic Revolution and Kang Jalal about the Prophet and his family. I was thinking, how could that be that the Prophet of Islam, the most beloved Prophet had no legacy or heirs. I didn't think that the Prophet could be like different leaders who tried to take advantage of maintaining his importance with his family. But I was thinking about the continuation of the Islamic mission of Islam. So how come the Prophet was just left everything to the Ummah, to the nation, without assigning his true successor? So then, and it's surprising how come Allah. It doesn't seem fair that Allah gave son and daughter or descendant to other prophets, while to the Prophet Muhammad he didn't give any son, or he gave sons, but then these two sons died in infancy, right? So as if the Prophet was discriminated from the other prophets who continued their legacy and inheritance through their heirs. So then I was thinking about Bibi Fatima, and finally I found also some references about the Ahlul Bayt, right after the Islamic Revolution. Then I read some books written by Dr. Ali Shariati, and in one of the book he wrote about Fatima is Fatima, where he mentioned very beautifully about the role of Lady Fatima and how she became a pivotal point connecting the Nubuwah, the prophethood, and the Imamah, the Islamic guardianship. So, and she was also the important personality connecting the Prophet to his descendants, because all the Imams and descendants of the Prophet came through the Lady Fatima and Imam Ali. So I was really amazed when I found this truth, that finally the missing link was found. So that's the story about the personality that I admire a lot, or most. I'm not sure if I remember in particular the actual date I converted into Shiism, but because, as you know, majority of Indonesian, not majority, some of the people who finally became Shias, they did it gradually. Initially, it started from the curiosity, and then finally they didn't practice right away, the way the Shia prays or does some other wajibat. So it's like a gradual process. But if I should mention the year, I think it's in 1984, 1985, maybe about 5-6 years after the Islamic Revolution, and after I was heavily involved in studying about Shiism and the Islamic Revolution and Imam Khomeini, I think I finally practiced the Shia teachings. Especially something which is quite obvious is the way you do the namaz, right? Because majority of Islamic Indonesian Muslims, they are adherents of Sunni Shafi, and the way they pray is like this. Well, the Shia is like the Maliki, one of the 4 school of thought in Sunni. They do namaz like this. So that's the first sign probably that I officially converted into Shiism. But since the knowledge of Islam, especially the Shiism, is so much abundant, so then I couldn't claim that I already became fully Shia. So it's a ongoing process even until now. When I converted to Shiism, or when I were inclined into Shiism, I told my family, especially my father, my mother, and for a certain extent to my siblings as well. Probably the one who was really interested about that is my father, because unlike my mother and my other siblings, they're just like a majority of people. They know Islam, just how to practice, how to do namaz, how to do the prayer, how to do the fasting, how to perform Hajj, how to pay the zakat. That's it. And they don't know about too much about history of Islam. They don't really know about. There's a split between Sunni and Shia, and there are 4 mazahib in Sunni itself. So my mother said, well, as long as it's Islam, it doesn't really matter. But my father, who came from Islamic background, because he was raised in the boarding school, Islamic boarding school, we call pesantren, and most of his youth time were spent there in the pesantren, in the boarding school. So he was really influenced by the traditional Islam. But then lately he was also influenced by his uncle, my uncle, his brother, his paternal brother, and my uncle was actually from another organization called Muhammadiyah, and they're more into type of reformist kind of Islam. So then this brother, my uncle, tried to correct some tradition which was brought by my father into the family, right? Like before the namaz, we would recite the salawat, qasida, and before we did the Quran recitation, also we did the same thing. So, and some du'as and zikr, those kind of things, according to my uncle, if they are not really if they are not really from the Prophet, then you don't have to practice. It's probably just a tradition, so you don't have to consider that as part of the Islamic teaching. So then with that understanding, then my father was a bit different now. Initially he was okay, when he knew that I'm inclined into Shiism, But then also after he read one book which was propagated by, I think, by the Saudi. The book was written by Ihsan Ilahi Zahir. So Ihsan Ilahi Zahir is one of the, I would say, prominent anti-Shia from Pakistan. And he wrote lots of anti-Shia books. And one of the book was read by my father. And before he was okay, but now he was not okay, because he thought, oh, there are some bad things about Shia. The thing that even you and I knew already, that Shia was created by Abdullah bin Sabah, that Shia considered Prophet Gabriel was mistaken when he descended and brought the wahyu, the inspiration is supposed to be for Imam Ali, but it went to the Prophet, to the Prophet Muhammad, and the Shia curse all the companions of the Prophet. Those kind of things influenced a bit my father. So then he was not he became not too happy with what happened with me about my inclination to Shiism. So, but then finally he knew that I'm convinced and I'm sure that what I'm doing is right. So then he left it to me. He didn't, he was not against me. He just wished me luck, and to my new endeavor in Shiism. To practice Shia in Indonesia, I would say generally it's not that difficult as compared to that in Malaysia, for instance. Because in Malaysia, for some reason, they are so strict to other school of thought other than the Sunni Shafi'i. Even the Sunni Shafi'i was also influenced now by some, Wahhabi flavor. So, and the government, for some reason, they're under this influence. It's not like in Indonesia, where the government doesn't want to get involved too much in religion, right? They would help Muslims to do the Hajj, organize Hajj, or manage the zakat, for instance, something related, or they also institutionalized Islamic law for Muslims, Islamic courts for Muslims. But other than that, they don't really interfere, any citizen's affair, not like in Malaysia. So when we or someone becomes Shia, although Shia is not known before, it's not really an issue in Indonesia. The government wouldn't mind, but one of the government body is what we call the Association of the Islamic Scholars. This association, not really association, I would say it's a body of Islamic scholars. This body of Islamic scholars helps people to deal with Islamic issues, and because the government doesn't interfere directly with daily activities of Muslims there, so through this body the government helps people. But unfortunately, this body of Islamic scholars, they are not as independent as the government, as indifferent. No, I would say they are quite biased, just like the Malaysian government and the Islamic body in Malaysia. Islamic body of Indonesia also kind of biased. But the good thing is there are always two different sides, right? The good one and the bad one, or the radical, more radical point of view, and more pragmatic or more compromise point of view. So even within this Islamic body, I mean the body of Islamic scholars, there are two types of approaches or people. So so far this body is not able to issue any fatwa or a verdict in banning Shiism in Indonesia. Some other party tried hard to do that, but as a whole, as a united voice, there is no official issue banning the Shiism in Indonesia. So I would say there's, in practice, there's not so much problem to be Shia in Indonesia. Of course, you ever heard about accident, about a killing of a person in the tragedy of Sampang. Sampang is a place in eastern part of Indonesia. So there's an island called Madura, and in one of the village there are about 200, 300 villagers who became Shias, and the mob came and tried to attack them. They burned their house, they burned their Islamic school. I think they tried to burn also their mosque. But and then one person was killed because of that. So these villagers were finally moved to another city in East Java, and until now they were not able to come back, to return to their hometown. So of course this accident was something we should regret about, but compared to other countries like in Pakistan or Bahrain or even Malaysia, the condition of Shias in Indonesia are not too bad, I would say. About the concept of intercession, initially I was struggling because when I was active in Salman Mosque, you know, the campus mosque that I mentioned earlier, somewhat influence of, you may say, Wahhabism or Islamic Brotherhood from Hassan al-Banna was there. So, you know, people were thinking to practice this pure Tawheed, or, you know, pure Islamic teaching, that we could only ask Allah. We can only ask Allah. We can only we cannot ask other than Allah to intercede us for our hajat, our request to Allah. And because they mentioned, you know, it's in the Quran. The Quran said that there is no intercession, there is no shafa'at other than from Allah. But then, you know, after I realized about the other approach on this intercession, then especially when I understood that Quran has to be explained by another ayat, another verse, so then I realized that there is something is not complete in that understanding, because about this intercession in particular, another ayat explains that yes, it's only Allah who has a power to intercede, to give intercession to people. But then he also mentioned no one can give intercession except whom he permits to give. So it means there are other people, other creation that can give intercession other than the Creator himself. So with that understanding, then it became easy for me to grasp the idea of other things related to this intercession, like the tawassul, tabarruk, istighosa, you know. So finally I fully understood about that concept. Yes, other misconception like shirk, you know, if we ask to other than Allah, or we ask Allah through the intercession, or if we, you know, do prostration on the stone, or you know, we do something else which is not related to what Prophet's teaching has taught to us. So these concepts, these misconceptions were actually from the influence of Wahhabism. And unfortunately, there are too many people, not too many, but there are significant people every day who believe that these misconceptions are really true. But once you dig up more about the teaching of Ahlul Bayt, then you realize that all these misconceptions remain misconceptions. So now it's really our task to educate people, because there are two types of people who promote this misconception, from this Wahhabi school of thought. First group is the one who is really ignorant because of lack of education and probably money. So then they can become easy target for those people who are wealthy and can ask them for money. So for these kind of people, we can educate them in order to eradicate this misconception. But another type of group of these Wahhabis, I think is more difficult to deal with, because they believe in this concept wholeheartedly, and sometimes it's also accompanied with a violent act that could end up being a Muslim killed. So this kind of people, this kind of group can only be faced by the way of Imam Ali dealt with the Kharijite. So if they do the violence against people, then just like Quran said, if you are attacked, then you have to do your self-defense, right? So that's the only way to eradicate the misconception, especially when it's accompanied with the violence or killing. I'm afraid I had no experience yet to visit imams in other countries like Iraq and Iran. I had performed my Hajj twice, first with my mother and the other time with my own family, my immediate family, with my wife and my son and daughter. So as you all know that there in Medina we have 6 Ma'sumin. The Prophet is the head of Ahlul Bayt. Lady Fatima, Bibi Fatima, is one of the Ma'sumin, one of the 14 Ma'sumin, and Imam Hassan, Imam Zain al-Abidin, Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq, and Imam Muhammad al-Baqir were buried there in Jannatul Baqi. So I was lucky to visit this 6 Ma'sumin there, but I'm not that lucky to visit another 8 Imams in different countries, 7 in Iraq and another one in Mashhad in Iran. So the most memorable event when I visited Medina was when I did my ibadat, when I was doing my ibadat in the Rawza. Rawza is the place between the Prophet's tomb and his mimbar. So that's the place where people believe a piece of Jannat, a piece of paradise, and that's according to the Prophet's hadith, I think. So because of that, people were eager to sit in that area. So, and it's also, the environment is so different. It's you could feel as if you are close to the Prophet. And yes, we believe that he physically died, he passed away, but we also at the same time believe that Prophet is still alive. So when you were there, you could feel, his presence. My favorite hadith is the Athaqalain, hadith Athaqalain, the 2 heavy things. The Prophet used to say that I left behind you two things, two heavy things. One that can connect you from, one that can connect you to Allah, which is Quran. And the other one is my itra, my family, Ahlul Bayt. So this hadith really the summary of the entire life. My first Muharram experience was something simple actually, because at the time we didn't have Husainiyah, we didn't have Imam Barga. So even we have limited Islamic centers that give service for these activities. So the first collective commemoration of Ashura or Majlis Eaza was done in a foundation founded by Kang Jalal, Mr. Jalaluddin Rahmat. The foundation was called Foundation of Mutahari, by the name of the Shahid Mutahari who was martyred in Iran. So in that foundation we commemorated the Ashura. That's the first time I did that commemoration. Before that, I did myself. I took leave absent every year whenever it falls at the Muharram day. So that's the individual practice of Muharram that I used to do. The difficulties in becoming the follower of Ahlul Bayt, perhaps right now is not so much as far as I myself is concerned. Unlike those brothers, Mu'min brothers and sisters in Pakistan, in Bahrain, probably in Afghanistan and eastern province of Saudi, and especially, not especially, including the one is in Malaysia, my experience was not that bad, because I could still practice the Shiism there without any hesitation, without any fear, because just like I mentioned before, the government doesn't interfere with your religious activities, and they don't mind with whatever you believe in. So I feel great that so far I didn't have any difficulties in practicing Shiism in Indonesia. But of course, it doesn't mean that I don't get any involvement with the faith of other Mu'min brother and sister all around the world. Whenever there is a chance for me to voice our concern, then I do it together with friends of mine and our groups there. A little advice for those who are considering to be the follower of Ahlul Bayt. First of all, you have to make yourself open. Don't take everything for granted. We were born as Muslims, and most of us, take it for granted and we don't study more. And some people even think further that, as long as you're Muslim, you're fine. Even, if you're sinning, maybe then after that you can do the tawbah, and then Allah will forgive you, and eventually you will go to Jannah. So this is another misconception. So being a Muslim is like a constant struggle. So the same thing when you are thinking to be a Shia, you have to do the same thing. You have to study, you have to practice your belief. You cannot just preach. You have to act on what you are preaching about too. So that's my message to all my brothers and sisters who are thinking or considering to follow to be the follower of Ahlul Bayt. And one thing, as the Prophet and Imams said, that when someone told the Prophet that he loves the Prophet and his family, and the Prophet reminded him that he has to be careful, he has to be ready, because after that he will be followed by the bala, by the trial and tribulation. So once you are ready to be a Shia, you have to be ready for the calamities and disaster, trial and tribulation. My final message to the viewers who are born Muslims, it's almost the same as to those who are thinking to be a follower of Ahlul Bayt. Islam is a dynamic religion. It cannot be considered as one of the it's the fastest growing religion in the world if the Muslims are not very active. Unfortunately, right now, the impression of people about Islam is not that good. So because of that, as people cannot see Islam by studying it, maybe they don't have time, they can only look Islam at ourselves, at how people practice Islam. So if they look Islam as represented by the ISIS, for instance, or by the Wahhabis, or by the Al-Qaeda, or by those who support Boko Haram or Al-Shabaab, so of course nobody would be interested to follow Islam. And as a born Muslim, you will be ashamed too. Probably you will hide your identity. So that's why, become a Muslim, especially as a born Muslim, you have to be active. You have to look for, you have to search for the truth all the time, because Islam is like source of, it's like ocean of knowledge. You learn something here, then you feel that you need more. And especially when you encounter Shiism, then now you have two different knowledges from two different school of thoughts. And another message for the viewers, whether they are those who are considering to be the follower of Ahlul Bayt or those who were born Muslims, that if I can share my experience, use both powers that you have right now, that with your background as a Sunni before and with your new encounter as a Shia, try to bridge the gap between the two school of thoughts, because both school of thoughts have contributed great achievement and to the civilization of Islam. So if we are fighting each other, if we are split and we go on our own way, then we will never get united. And don't you think, don't you agree that two heads are better than one, right?